Silvana.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Bob Shepherd.
We'll catch up in a bit in about two. Right, ladies and gents, thank you very much for sticking with us out there. I know it's a long time sat in this room, so we've got an extremely esteemed panel here, some that have travelled some distance. Lindsay, thank you very much. And others that are legends within the industry. Biff, to introduce yourself.
Biff Mitchell. I work at Glastonbury Festival, numerous other festivals, and production work for different events around the world.
Just so he understated what he does. He's an absolute legend in the industry, just to take away from. But thanks, Biff, for coming along. Robert, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi, my name's Rob Shepherd. I'm a clinical audiologist and have worked for the last 38 years in various hospitals and clinics treating auditory and vestibular hearing and balance problems, and for the last 25 years have specialised in tinnitus and the prevention of auditory injury in various environments, including the music industry.
Thanks, Robert. And Lindsay, can I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hello, my name is Lindsay McIntyre and I'm a director at KSG Acoustics up in Scotland. So I specialise in music and entertainment, acoustics and audio, and I'm also on the Nighttime Industry Association board.
And Lindsay is one of the key people in Scotland that stopped the ridiculous situation where background music wasn't allowed in pubs and bars. And she was the one that actually lobbied extremely hard on behalf of the industry to get that stopped. So thank you for that in its own right, and thank you for coming down.
It's ridiculous, but thank
you. Stephen, if I can get you to introduce yourself as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Wheatley. I'm here as I'm working on a initiative of the World Health Organization called Make Listening Safe campaign. In the spirit of disclosure, I'm also a member of the World Health Organization core team on hearing loss prevention. I'm a founder director of the UK Hearing Conservation Association, and I make a living stopping people going deaf if they wear headphones. But I'm here in my pro bono role, working on behalf of the World Health Organization.
Thank you. And I think, as I reiterated, I work pretty much pro bono, a lot of the things that I do as well. So I understand where your heart is with this. Listen, let's cut to the chase. I started as a drum and bass promoter. So as far as I was concerned, when I was a youngster, I used to stand in front of the speakers, and if your chest wasn't rattling, it just wasn't the right level or the right thing. The sad bit about it is, as I've aged, and I'm 50 now, I sit here and I, in many respects, love the fact that I was involved in the scene. And if I'd have known now what I've started to learn without a doubt through Rob and Biff and Lindsay and others, would I have made different decisions? Would I have considered what I was doing in terms of real time? I speak to DJs, I speak to promoters, I speak to people right the way across a crew, sound techs, etc., all of my age that have been through this journey of, the passion for our industry, but come away with some real deficits of that. So for their love and the drive towards music, have also lost in some of this in terms of their health and their position. And we were just talking a minute ago at our real age against our hearing age, which is a huge concern. So today really benchmarks the NTIA's drive towards an education and awareness program for our industry, whether you're a member of bar staff, you're a lighting technician, a DJ, a member of crew on a live touring gig, whatever it is, we are now setting out the stall in terms of what the NTIA is doing to drive towards educating and creating an awareness campaign. And what is fantastic, although we're very early in terms of the World Health Organization campaign, we are, keen to drive and partner, as we've discussed, to move these things forward and take a greater part in that education for the UK, but support WHO's position in terms of that campaign moving forward. So if it's possible, Steve, can I get you to just set out a little bit of a feel for what WH is doing and how this has come about, and then I can bring it over to the rest of the panel just talking about their experiences. And Rob, I think the really important part for you is to just show the clinical situations that you experience that possibly people are unaware of. But Steve, can I get you just to feed in initially?
Yeah, thank you for that. If I might just take one step backwards, let's look at what is the issue. 5 million years ago, we either evolved, were created, whatever your belief is, with a pair of these stuck on the side of our head. And the reason for that is so we could communicate, obviously without microphones and all the fancy stuff we've got here, but also to know that the saber-toothed tiger's up there rather than down there. So they're actually to help us communicate with each other and to keep us safe. That's what they're for. Around about 150 years ago, people started amplifying sound, and how exciting that has been, hasn't it? I love it as well. And we're not in the business of killing people's enjoyment of sound. That's absolutely not the game. Unfortunately, in those 150 years, your ears haven't evolved. Your ears are also consumable, and I'll leave it to Rob to explain this, but we're now seeing situations where people are effectively having hearing more typical of people older by a considerable margin. We were talking earlier on, he confessed to his problems. The reason I'm in this business is my hearing is, I'm old anyway, and my hearing is at least 20 to 25 years older than I am by how it works. My hearing is damaged through Led Zeppelin, riding motorbikes, and shooting. Nobody told me that any of those things was going to be bad for my hearing. Now, to your point, I might still have gone to see Led Zeppelin's very last concert without wearing hearing protection, because that was going to be the last time they ever performed. If I had known about the other things, I might have taken some steps to mitigate some of that risk. So the World Health Organization's position is they've done a lot of research. The latest research shows by 2050, 1 in 4 of the world's population will be at severe risk of hearing loss. That isn't going to be equally distributed around the world. It's going to be more represented in the, probably the wrong word, but developed countries than perhaps sub-Saharan Africa. So we're talking about, and it's not that long away, is it, 2050? And so what they've done is they have issued, there's 2 big initiatives. One is some suggestions for what can be done in live events, which may be relevant to you. And then the other is providing headphone users with information about their exposure. Because headphones are ubiquitous. We're working with people in wearing another hat. Headphones will last 14 hours before you turn them off, before they go flat. You'll be able to wear them all day, every day. You'll never get your phone out of your pocket. It'll become a Wi-Fi connection to the outside world. So the World Health Organization's stance is, let's inform people of the risk and then give them some ideas about what they can do. That's what we want to do. And the theme here is not to say, stop doing that. It's, did you know? That's the theme. And the logo, which you may see at some time near future, is love sound, because we do, then listen with care, which starts a conversation, hopefully, about what does that mean. So that's the World Health Organization's initiative, which we're piloting here, I'm proud to say, in the UK.
Thanks, Stephen. I mean, one of the things I've always said about this is, if you love music, why would you abuse your greatest asset or connection with that passion? And I know it sounds, I mean, I'm hearing myself now as I talk. I've got a 14-year-old daughter that walks around with the headphones on, but the reality is I'm 50 now, and I've got to really look back and think, could I have made better decisions? And all we're talking about is the longevity of your hearing for lots of purposes. Don't use up those credits is probably the best way to put it. So look, I really want to bring Rob in here, because one of the big things that I took away from this, and Biff, you'll reinforce this, and I know, Lindsay, you've seen some of the work that Rob's put forward, it's just really the understanding from a clinical perspective of the impacts, and possibly those suggestions that don't even enter your mind, which probably, I mean, me and you, Biff, we've had a long conversation about this, and it was almost like, no, we've got to really get this and get, Robert, in front of people so that people can hear. And it was a really important driver, alongside, Steve and what you brought in terms of WHO and the guidance around. We felt that we needed to do more. We needed to produce education. We needed to start to be an active part in it. So Robert, I want you to do what you did to me and Biff, really. It's sort of, not in that way, but you know where I was going with it. It just inform us of those key points that possibly, just blew us away, really, and worried us in the same respect. So.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing, echo what Steve says, we don't want to be what Mr. Goldsmith said earlier, the blue meanies. We want to engage and inform people about what exposure to loud sound does. But what I talk about with some of the music students that I see, we want to conserve the music by conserving your health. So we want to maintain your ability and your longevity in your career. Exposure to loud sound has various effects on the human body. We all know that we will experience a certain degree of hearing loss with probably associated tinnitus, so that ringing in your ears. And the first sign of that, how many people out there today had problems carrying on a conversation in background noise? How many people go to bed and hear a ringing in their ears? So that's the first sign of exposure to damagingly loud sound. But the other health implications, and the ones that aren't really known about, is that untreated hearing loss significantly increases your risk of dementia. So a mild hearing loss will increase your risk by 2. Moderate hearing loss, you're 3 times more likely to suffer from dementia, and a severe hearing loss, you're 5 times more likely to suffer cognitive decline and dementia. Exposure to loud sound will also increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. It increases your risk of strokes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, ulcers. So it's not just about a little bit of hearing loss. It has a wide-ranging effect on your overall health and well-being. And I think it then links up with other aspects. You were talking about tonic rider. So mental health and tinnitus are very closely related. So I think everything that we're talking about relates to the whole industry and how we can prevent unnecessary injury.
Thanks, Robert. And I think the resonating thing, both myself and Biff, and I know we've been on calls with yourself, Lindsay, but the resonating thing was dementia really rang home for us. It just absolutely, when you sit back and you think, I didn't even tie the two of those together. Biff, give us your perspective when you first heard the piece from Robert.
I was quite shocked. The dementia thing really hit me, as I've got a few friends who are suffering, just lost somebody a couple of months ago to dementia, who listened to a lot of loud music. Somebody I knew all pretty much all my life. That resonated really, really greatly with me. I've been working in this business for 40 years now. The first 20 years, it was never mentioned. I've worked with Motorhead, they're loud. There was no earplugs. You just live with it, you got on with it. Nobody even suspected, looked at giving you any sort of ear protection. And then you said that all that really happened then, the difference was a Perspex sign, say, with a pair of ear defenders on, with a tub of disposable foam earplugs, and that's it. And that's what the health and safety executive expect us to put on every stage. But that's it. It's just a sign, yellow headphones, and a dispenser for really rubbish earplugs. And that's it. And we've got to be doing better. I think that's what this is about. We've got to be doing better. And it's educating. I don't think it's something that you can enforce with people, but people got to know what the problems that hearing or loud noise can lead to.
I think the key thing is just those mitigations are too loose. We talk about noise at work. The only time noise, being really honest within our industry, whether we're talking about bar staff or not, the only time noise at work becomes an issue is if you have an EHO visit, they flag it and they ask what you're doing about it. And half the time we get phone calls and everyone's scrambling around to really get an understanding of dB levels and exposure and where that sits and what your staff rotation method is. And you sort of sit back and you think, I didn't even know that was supposed to happen. And then they're measuring dB going, right, well, these levels are way beyond that, so how do I deal with that? It means, you know, sometimes, I mean, I remember getting phone calls saying, well, that means that these staff can only work in these areas for 15 minutes at any one time. And it's, you know, it's surreal. So, look, Lindsay, I mean, we've spoke many a time about these situations, and you've got real life experience because you've got people that tour in some of the biggest, you know, can you give us some of the feedback on from what you see on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's particularly interesting is that there's definitely been more awareness developing over recent times. So it used to be that the tours would, maybe a bit like what's been described, you know, that there would be no hearing protection and no discussion about it, but we found that certainly front of house audio engineers have realised that the damage to their hearing has a direct effect on the quality of their mix, and therefore the chances that they're going to get hired to do anything else. So I think even from a commercial perspective, they've really started to think more closely about protecting their hearing. And it's the old story. I think once you see people wearing hearing protection, and a lot of them have got custom molds, which is what we do with our own staff as well, then it becomes more commonplace, and it takes away that sort of stigma, I guess, about well, you know, wearing hearing protection. I'd really like to get into a way where, you know, we never have a problem with going to an optician to get our eyes tested and wearing glasses. Our ears should just be treated the same way. So there's definitely progress being made. One of the things I'm really keen to do with this World Health Organization initiative is to get into the colleges and universities, many of whom we already have good connections with, and really train people from the outset so it just becomes the norm. It's just part of their everyday looking after their health, and that's normal. And I think we can move towards that, and this provides us with good tools to do it.
Listen, it's a great platform, and I 100% agree. We've got to get early on. You know, I saw an advert a little while back, and it was a young lad, about 14, 15, on an advert, and he said, I'm going to be a stage technician for Glastonbury when I'm 18, but I don't know it yet. And it was a really nice sort of progressive sort of position. And I think the important thing, there's two things that we really need to get across here. Education is one, but we also need to get to those mentors, people like Biff, who, you know, has people look up to in terms of someone on site that, you know, you can curate and train and make people, but there are thousands of them out there that are, you know, some of these youngsters coming in, these riggers, these crew members aspire towards, and they've got to show best practice as well. And they've got to drive people to attain the same level. And I mean, that mentoring thing, I think is really, really important. Biff, I mean, you're the first one to really highlight this, and just looking at ways we can convert those people who do now look after their hearing now, making sure the youngsters are doing the same.
Yeah, interesting point on the people that are doing it. The most people I see working on a gig who have ear protection are the sound engineers, and they've all got in-ear modes. Now, that to me is, you know, those guys work with sound all the time. They've got them, why haven't you? You know, security. You watch all those guys lined up in front of the pyramid stage. They've just got disposable foam earplugs in, because that's what Specialised who they work for, whoever they work for, come around and give them. Nobody says to those guys, you should be investing in proper ear protection. Not wearing cans. I did a job a little while ago and I had to wear cans for 7 hours. It's uncomfortable, you know, it just gets annoying after a while, and you can't hear everything properly. But I think we need to take the lead from the sound company guys, that they're actually doing something about it. And if they're doing something about it, why aren't you?
It's true when you talk about security. I mean, they are very loose with regard to hearing protection. But Robert, just bringing you in on this, I mean, in terms of hearing protection, when you hear about foam sort of ear defenders in terms of mitigation against moulded, and you know, what is the best way to do it? Is it about limiting exposure? Is it about, you know, what in terms of the defenders and ear protection, what's the best way to sort of go about it? Is fitted the best way, etc.?
I think you need to have an accurate measurement of the risk, because if someone's only being exposed occasionally to a moderate level of sound, then disposable earplugs might be adequate. But if someone's listening to loud sound for 8 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, then you need to look at alternatives. Yeah. One of my roles is that I sit on the European committee that sets the standards for hearing protection. And it's quite illuminating that when people buy hearing protection, they look on the box and they see a figure. Actually, the figure they get in the real world is nowhere near that. So it's really important that when you're looking at hearing protection, custom molded hearing protection is great, but make sure that it's verified when you buy it, because just because someone's taken the shape of your ear doesn't mean that it's doing what you think it's doing. And I'm really pleased that in probably 18 months' time, it's going to be mandatory for everybody to have their hearing protection fit tested when they purchase it. It won't just come out in a box to them. They'll have to go back in and have it verified. So, I mean, what type of hearing protection? Again, it depends on your risk. But I think you need to find someone who's adequately trained, who asks you what your risk is, not just, oh, I'm a musician, here you go, there's a set of plugs. If people don't ask you, they're not really interested in you, they're interested in product sales.
Do you think half the issue is within our industry is actually having someone who has a greater understanding in terms of noise risk? Because when you talk about an RA, you don't often see, you do see high noise areas, but definitely I always go back to protect duty in some respects. When you talk about the differences between a below 800 capacity, above 800 capacity and above 2000, when you start to get to 2000, because you've got SAG meetings to go through, the risk assessments are more structured. But sometimes the intermediate clubs are probably the most exposed environments. Do you think that there is a potential shortcoming in terms of skill set to measuring risk within businesses to then could accommodate for some of the challenges in terms of mitigating the exposure for staff and people within the industry?
Yeah, I think there's always an opportunity to have a better skill mix and have more knowledgeable staff to promote that. I think it's important that everyone takes responsibility for their own health as well. So I think the more information you get out to the wider community, the better. And I think when I speak to my music students, I talk about their daily sound allowance.
Yeah.
So if a student is a little reticent about wearing hearing protection when they're performing, understandably, then you need to say, well, don't waste that. I mean, there's a certain amount of sound a person can listen to throughout a day. That might be a short period of loud sound or a longer period of moderate sound. But beyond that, damage will begin. So you have to say, why waste your allowance sitting on a tube, listening to your headphones at high volumes I was riding the tube this morning and it was 106 decibels. So you can be exposed to that for 30 seconds, 15 seconds before damage starts? No. So people need to be aware of sound in the wider community, and then they can have a much better appreciation of how they protect their hearing in the music-rich environments.
Thanks, Robert. I'm going to come across to yourself now because as we share a common ground in terms of a bit of tinnitus and some challenges, it's as you can appreciate, this campaign that's being driven by WHO, the guidance that have been released, as you can understand, it's a challenge for everyone to try and create these environments of safety. What is the long-term position for WHO in terms of hearing loss across the world? Is it about reducing the budgetary input into that? Is it about just higher education and awareness? Is it about businesses taking action? What are those key areas that you want to see in terms of WHO, in terms of helicopter strategy, not granular detail?
Okay, I think that's probably a question you should ask the WHO. I've picked up, sorry, I'm not the WHO. Forgive me, it's a very precious relationship and I need to be clear what I'm doing for them rather than I'm being one of them. It's the World Health Organization's ambition to make the cohort between 10 and 40 years of age, because those of you who are over 40, you've done the damage already probably. So you don't have to put your hand up. You don't have to. I didn't think you were over 40, madam. So those of you over 40 have probably done considerable harm to your hearing already. Be careful with it for the rest of your life to make sure it serves you. But the focus is on improving the hearing of people who are 40 years of age. And the way you do that is you start talking to them when they're 10 years of age and playing computer games. And I hate to tell you, you need to have a word with your daughter. But, you know, it's that type of conversation. So the World Health Organization's plan through the Make Listening Safe is to increase the awareness in those age groups. It's not going to be a homogeneous plan, because a message, firstly, I'm not going to be transmitting the message because I look like the father or the grandfather of the person who's receiving the message, but I do know lots of people who are clever enough to deliver it very specifically to 10-year-old people. So I'm going to have an ask here. I don't think that my colleagues actually realised I might do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We want to get people interested in this programme who would be prepared to influence other people. So if you're a 10-year-old, there may be a musician or an esports player or a gamer that you follow on one of those their social media platforms. They'll have much more effect in transmitting a message to that 10-year-old person than I would, because he's going to think, or she's going to think, I'm their grandparent, and I'm just telling them off, and I'm not doing that. So the plan is to create an awareness campaign in the United Kingdom as a pilot for 193 other countries. So we should be very proud that we got picked to do that. We're making a good fist of it. We've recruited 22 organisations, of which we're very pleased to say the NTIA is one. And between you have over 100 million social media contacts in the United Kingdom. So social media is clearly a very good way of getting at the people between 10 and 40 years of age, and we're going to use that mercilessly. So to go back to your point precisely, we want to make half the people in the world between 10 and 40 aware of the risks to their hearing. And it is not a stop doing that campaign. It's a did you know campaign. That some of those people will then take action. And we'll also dovetail it into, as Rob was talking about and Mike was talking about, the occupational side as well. Because if anything, people in the occupational space are probably at greater risk because they have to do it. If you're doing something recreationally, you don't have to do it. You don't have to listen to music. You don't have to go to a football match or whatever. But if it's your job, you do. And I think we need to think very carefully about how we work with employers. But I like your mentoring idea. And I agree with you, Biff. You know, people who are sound engineers, why do you think they look after their hearing? Because the money comes from these. If they can't hear, they ain't making money. And there's nothing sadder than seeing a sound engineer who can't do his job anymore. And I'm sure Rob will. So that's the ambition. 10 to 40 years of age, 50% of them at least know about the problem. Then we'll go another iteration.
Thanks, Stephen. That's perfect. That's and as you can appreciate, there is a wider context to not only supporting the campaign through WHO, but also an education program and a message that we're putting out within our ranks, because, you know, we've got over 10,000 businesses that we represent, and there is a really simple way of us penetrating. And as you can appreciate, you know, the reach in terms of those amounts of people alongside influences is phenomenal. So, Lindsay, I just want to come to you now. I mean, what would you like to see out the back end of this? You are heart and soul in the middle of that sort of music sort of role. And mentoring, I think, is, you know, as we say, could be a great idea for sort of us, but we also have got to consider the age groups that we're trying to attach ourselves. And without a doubt, I am going to speak to my daughter, but the reality is she knows best. So, so because she's 14 and she's going on 18, and I guarantee she's standing at the back because she's here today going, probably with her headphones on, not hearing me, which is even worse. So, Lindsay, can I just get you to give a perspective on that mentoring side and what you've seen industry-wise that you'd like to change?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love that idea of mentoring, because I think it has such strength. And, you know, we're sort of talking about, you know, sound engineers, but when you go to a gig, you look at all these different people with all their different jobs, and that focus hasn't managed to get into these other groups. Now, very often when they're on tour buses going around the country, all the sound engineers are on one bus, so maybe we need to mix it up a bit and put some lighting guys and riggers in with them. So I think there's a really strong piece there about education and mentoring. I was just reflecting earlier on when we were talking about venues and things like that, because obviously part of this is like, well, what can we do? as business owners perhaps, or as venue owners? How do we need to look after our staff? And I think there's a real gap. We talked earlier on about the control of noise at work, and it just doesn't function for our industry, because for all the reasons that we've talked about, the levels just aren't commensurate with the way that people work in the industry. So we almost need to find another mechanism, and that's why I like the idea of having a sort of WHO toolbox to kind of bridge that gap a bit. As an acoustic consultant, it's not unusual for me to go into venues, generally, as you say, that it's been triggered by an environmental health intervention or somebody else getting involved with the business who's asked to see the noise impact assessment or whatever. So I think there's also a place for a sort of cheap, deliverable survey type service, so that people can go in and just kind of give the type of sort of high level advice that helps people start to implement these things. Because I think there's a lot of concern that moving towards a new regime can be very expensive. If you need to instruct an acoustic consultant to come in, if you need to start buying hardware, if you need, even custom molds are expensive, so all of these things. So we need to find things that are practical and deliverable and really help to engage people with it that way.
I think the interesting part is talking about noise at work. I mean, I think what we need to, and we're starting to realise this, is when we start to talk about first aid at work within nighttime economy, it's a very specific position. Our challenge is noise at work is not built for nighttime economy or businesses within our sector. So I think potentially there is some guidance or position that needs to be undertaken that's going to make a difference specific to our sector. So I think that's really important. One question I was going to ask you, Rob, which is an interesting one, is, listen, we always have in our younger years, everyone chases volume, not quality of sound. What's the difference in terms of impact on hearing between, the volume element of poor sound and the quality, clean sound system, possibly not at the volume levels that we're talking in terms of exposure? Is there a difference?
I'm not sure exactly the question, but I think actually you'll get a better quality of sound with a lower level of volume. I don't think you have to turn up to 11 to really enjoy it. And that's really what we need to educate the industry, or not necessarily the industry, but people don't need to leave the club at night with ringing in their ears to think they had a good night. And that used to be the case when I was young. If you didn't have ring in your ears, it wasn't a great night. If you leave a ring in your ears, you've damaged your hearing probably for life. But that's nothing. So yes, just turning it down a little bit, people will enjoy the music probably more. Yeah. And if you employ some of the guidance in the WHO standards, I think you'll find that the audience will enjoy the evening more, instead of leaving feeling they've been assaulted with sound.
I hear that.
Maybe.
So look, I mean, we're getting to a point where we're coming to an end. So I'm going to ask that each of you individually just give your perspective of what you'd like to see moving forward in one or two sentences. And I'll finish with yourself, Steve, if that's okay. Biff, can I just ask you one or two sentences, what do you want to see from the industry that you work within to make a big difference? 2 points.
Education. The facts need explaining to people, where they can actually understand that by protecting their ears they can make a difference and they can keep their hearing, or they're going to be getting to sort of odour and they're not going to hear anything. So, yeah.
No, valid point. Robert?
I think the purpose of the day and launching the NTIA initiative is really to engage with everyone here. It isn't to criticise or lecture, it's to see how people here in the audience and people who aren't in the audience can possibly, what their perspective is on how we can best implement this. Yeah. So it's engaging and getting feedback on how we move forward.
Thank you. Lindsay?
2 things come to mind. One is normalising protecting your hearing and just taking away that sort of any remnants of the stigma. So I'd really like to see that progress. The other thing that I've got a great deal of interest in as well is working with the PA designers, so the guys who actually make the boxes and kit in the first place. because we're finding that sound levels are actually coming down anyway. Like a lot of shows are actually just gradually getting a wee bit quieter, and that comes back to that quality point. So I'd like to see a bit of engagement there as well to see whether we can push quality over quantity.
I think that was a point I was trying to get at, Robert, is whether there is a quality element that we can address rather than a volume. But thank you, Stephen.
Well, firstly, thank you very much indeed to the NTIA for joining our supporters. We really appreciate that. My wish, I'm going to be slightly greedy. I'm going to have a couple of wishes. One is, I would love to fast forward through the activity and get to that point where we interview a cohort of people between 10 and 40, and they know about the risk. Whether they do anything about it is entirely up to them, but at least if they know about it, they can consider it. They're not blind to that risk. And the biggest thing that's going to get us there is we're looking for sponsors at the moment who are willing to invest in this campaign to help us to promote it and get it launched later this year. So those would be my wishes, but a sincere thanks on behalf of the Make Listening Safe campaign for inviting me here and for partnering with the Make Listening Safe campaign. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We're just coming to an end. Thank you to all the panellists for feeding in and giving some honest and some very stark realities to what can happen. But the reality, where we want to be is to avoid that. 10 to 40-year-olds, I'm outside of that number. My daughter is, by the way, if you're listening. I'm sure you're not, because she practices that on a daily basis. And that's probably where the hearing issues come in, actually. So maybe it's a resonating quality of my voice that's the issue. Anyhow, so thank you so much to everyone on the panel. Thank you to Biff, Robert, Lindsay and Stephen for being here. And we look forward to progressing this campaign, supporting this huge campaign across the world, but particularly in the UK, to make a very, very strong case for people to be fully aware and to educate these youngsters so that they don't fall into the trap that many of us have, particularly myself at 50, standing in front of speakers as a drum and bass promoter, thinking that it's great until I'm 50 and it's all gone wrong. Thank you very much. Enjoy, and can't wait to see you at the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.